the Union soldiers on the other side until more Union soldiers showed up behind them. And the slaughter over here was just terrible. Crew came here not long after, and if you look behind you here, you can see one of the famous photos they took.
History says the Civil War ended with a treaty. This photo says it ended with a secret. Buried in a wax-sealed album for a century, a new image of Abraham Lincoln has been discovered. It shows the president looking healthy, calm, and surrounded by men who don't cast shadows. When forensic teams analyzed the image, they found a hidden message stitched into the wool of a soldier's uniform. It references a project called Lazarus. The theory? Lincoln didn't just win the war, he was preparing for a war we haven't fought yet. And the man in the photo? He was the first soldier of the future. The first glitch in the simulation. It started the way most world-changing events do, in total silence. Claire Donovan was cleaning out the attic of her family estate in upstate New York, a house that had been in her bloodline since the days of the telegraph. It was a space filled with the heavy, sweet smell of dry rot and old cedar, the kind of air that feels thick with ghosts. She wasn't looking for a conspiracy. She was looking for tax papers, but in the far corner, wedged behind a stack of moth-eaten wool blankets, sat a trunk. It was bound in brass, green with oxidation, and locked with a mechanism that looked more like a puzzle than a padlock. When Claire finally popped the latch, the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Inside, it was the usual time capsule junk. Railroad bonds, lace gloves, letters written in that spindly, impossible cursive. But at the very bottom, wrapped in layers of beeswax-coated paper, was a leather album. The spine was cracked like a dry riverbed. The pages were brittle. Most of the photos inside were exactly what you would expect from the 19th century. Stiff, unsmiling people in black and white, looking like they were holding their breath. They were tintypes and daguerreotypes, the standard tech of the day. Gray, grainy, dead. When she turned to the final page, the logic of the world snapped. There was a single photograph sealed behind a sheet of primitive laminate. It felt heavier than the others, thicker. It hummed with a weird energy. When Claire peeled back the protective cover, she didn't see the gray fog of history. She saw blue, deep, electric navy blue. She saw the rich, muddy brown of polished leather boots. She saw the flush of sunburn on a soldier's cheek. She saw the golden reflection of the sun hitting a brass button. It was Abraham Lincoln. He was seated outside a large command tent, his top hat resting on his knee. Beside him stood General Ulysses S. Grant, looking gritty and exhausted. They were frozen in mid-conversation. The detail was insane. You could count the stitches on Lincoln's vest. You could see the individual hairs in Grant's beard. Claire's brain couldn't process it. Color photography in 1865? That is physically impossible. The first color photo wasn't supposedly taken until decades later, and even then it was a blurry mess of 3 different filters. This looked like it was shot on a 4K mirrorless camera yesterday. It was like finding a jet engine in a Roman ruin. She assumed it was a fake, a really good prank. But the smell, it smelled like vinegar, silver, and something metallic, like ozone. She took it to Professor George Kramer, a man who had spent 40 years staring at Civil War images. He was the kind of guy who could spot a fake button from 50 yards away. When Claire placed the photo on his desk, he didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He stopped breathing. He put on white cotton gloves, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped his magnifying glass. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Claire told him. The attic, the trunk, the wax paper. Kramer didn't look up. He pointed a trembling finger at the edge of the paper stock. "This is albumin silver print," he said. "This is the standard paper from the 1860s. It is chemically incapable of holding color dye. It's like trying to paint a watercolor on a sheet of glass. The physics don't work." It's not that simple, though. They rushed it to the Advanced Imaging Lab at the New York Historical Society. They put the photo under a spectral scanner, a machine usually used to find hidden layers in Da Vinci paintings. Everyone expected the computer to say acrylic paint or modern ink. They expected to find that someone had colored it in by hand in 1980. But the computer spit out a result that made the lab technicians gasp. The pigments weren't on top of the paper. They were inside the molecular structure of the silver. The scanner detected organic compounds that shouldn't be there. Traces of Tyrian purple, a dye lost for centuries, crushed lapis lazuli, and a strange photoreactive isotope of silver that doesn't occur naturally on Earth. The crazy part is, this wasn't just photography, this was alchemy. It was a chemical process that was hundreds of years ahead of its time. It suggested that someone in 1865 had access to knowledge or technology that we still don't fully understand today. Some theorists believe this links back to the lost patents of the era. There are rumors of a Janus device, a camera prototype developed by a secret circle of scientists who worked for the Union. They say this device didn't just capture light, it captured the quantum state of the moment. That's why the color looks so alive. It isn't just a reflection, it is a chemical imprint of reality. But while the scientists were losing their minds over the chemistry, Claire was looking at something else. Something terrifying. There were 3 men in the foreground, Lincoln, Grant, and a third man. He was standing slightly behind them in the gap between the president and the general. He wasn't wearing a general's star. He wasn't wearing an officer's sash. He was wearing a plain private's uniform, but it was tailored perfectly. And unlike Lincoln and Grant, who were looking at each other, this man was looking straight into the lens. His eyes were piercing, calm, almost bored. Claire felt a cold sweat break out on her neck. She knew that face, not from a history textbook, but from her own living room. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a digitized copy of a family portrait from 1912. It was her great-great-grandfather, William Donovan. It was the same man, the same ears, the same scar on the chin, the same intense stare. William Donovan was a ghost. According to every family story, he was a simple field medic who got lost during the chaos of the war's end. He wasn't an advisor, he wasn't important. So why was he standing in the most secure location on the planet? Why was he standing in the zone of silence right next to the commander-in-chief? The experts ran facial recognition. It was a 100% match, but when they cross-referenced his name with the National Military Archive, the mystery didn't get solved. It got dangerous. The computer screen flashed a red warning, file sealed, level Omega. A ghost in the machine. Level Omega? Claire asked. What does that even mean? Kramer looked like he had seen a ghost. It means this file doesn't exist for the public. It means it was sealed by an executive order. This level of classification is usually reserved for nuclear codes or aliens. He bypassed the firewall using his clearance, but the file on William Donovan was mostly blacked out. Redacted lines of thick black ink covered everything. But there was one date that wasn't covered. Status, missing in action. Date, April 6, 1865. Let me break it down for you. April 6 was 3 days before the surrender at Appomattox. The photo of Lincoln and Grant was clearly taken on April 9th, the day the treaty was signed. You can tell by the specific mud on Grant's boots, Virginia red clay, which only appeared after the heavy rains of the 8th. So according to the U.S. government, William Donovan vanished into thin air on April 6th. He was gone. Presumed eliminated. Yet here he was, 3 days later, standing alive, well and armed right next to the president. This is where the time slip theory comes in. Some wild theorists believe that the Shadow Post wasn't just a secret service unit. They believe it was a group of soldiers who were unstuck in time. Men who appeared when history needed a nudge and vanished when the job was done. It sounds crazy, right? But look at Donovan's face. He doesn't look like a man who has been sleeping in the mud for 4 years. He looks clean, well-fed. He looks like he just stepped out of a shower. And get this. There is a concept in photography called the uncanny valley. It is when something looks human but isn't quite right. Donovan has that look. His skin is too smooth, his eyes are too sharp. Kramer started digging through the physical paper archives, the stuff that never got digitized because the government wanted it forgotten. He found a crate of rejected field notes from the Army of the Potomac. After 6 hours of searching, he found a scrap of parchment. It was a handwritten note from a field commander scribbled in pencil. WD, transferred to Shadow Post per Al's request. Asset is effectively invisible. No rations to be issued, no weapons drawn unless required. No rations? Claire asked. Why would a soldier not need food? Kramer didn't answer. He was staring at the phrase, shadow post. The shadow post is a legend, Kramer said. It's the holy grail of Civil War conspiracies. The rumor is that Lincoln didn't trust the War Department. He thought there were Confederate spies in his own cabinet. So he built a parallel agency, a group of ghost soldiers. They didn't report to the army, they reported only to Al, Lincoln. Everyone's obsessed with the Illuminati or the Freemasons, but the Shadow Post makes them look like a book club. These men were allegedly chosen not for their strength, but for their sight. Some diaries from the era mention soldiers who could see around corners or knew the rain before it fell. Was William Donovan a psychic, a remote viewer, or just a man with incredible intuition? And that's putting it lightly. The photo showed something else that backed up this ghost theory. If you looked at the other officers in the background, the regular soldiers, they weren't looking at Lincoln. They were looking at Donovan, and they looked terrified. One officer is actually making a sign of the cross with his hand. Another is clutching his saber hilt, staring at Donovan's back. They knew he wasn't one of them. They knew he was something else. Elsa, the imaging specialist, called them over to the big 8K monitor. "Forget the faces for a second," she said. "Look at the uniform. The resolution on this prototype film is so high I can see the thread count." She zoomed in on Donovan's chest. The deep blue wool filled the screen. She focused on the lapel right where the fabric folded over under the collar. Hidden underneath the collar was a patch. It was tiny, maybe the size of a thumbprint. It was sewn with black thread on blue wool designed to be invisible to the naked eye, but the camera had caught the relief of the stitching. It was a symbol, an eye inside a triangle but inverted, and below it 3 letters, P.E.C. Kramer adjusted his glasses. "Presidential Escort Committee," he whispered. "I thought the Secret Service was created after Lincoln died?" Claire asked. "Officially, yes," Kramer replied, "but this proves Lincoln had a prototype detail. A pre-Secret Service. But the symbol, the inverted eye, that is old. That is older than America. That is Pythagorean geometry. It represents the Watcher, the one who sees the end from the beginning." So here's the deal. William Donovan wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a watcher. He was placed there to observe a specific event. The photo proves the P.E.C. was real and operational days before the assassination. But the patch wasn't the only thing hidden in the wool. Elsa moved the cursor down a few inches to the chest pocket. "There is something else," she said. "It looks like text. This wasn't a patch, this was stitching. Someone had taken a needle and thread and sewn words directly into the fabric of the coat, using thread that was just a shade lighter than the jacket. It was Spycraft 101, steganography. Hiding messages in plain sight. Elsa cranked up the contrast. The words popped out glowing faintly on the screen. The message was a countdown and it had already reached 0. The timeline correction. The room went so quiet you could hear the hard drive spinning. The words stitched into the coat were jagged, like they had been sewn in the dark or in a hurry. "Target verified. Stand until April 14th, then engage." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. April 14th, 1865. The night Abraham Lincoln went to Ford's Theater. The night John Wilkes Booth pulled the trigger. What most people don't realize is that the assassination is full of holes. The bodyguard who was supposed to be at the door, John Parker, left his post to get a drink. The lock on the door was broken. It was almost too easy for Booth. But this stitching, this changes the narrative completely. Stand until April 14th, then engage. This implies that Donovan and the Shadow Post knew the date. They knew the target. They were told to stand down and wait until the specific moment of the attack to engage. This brings us to a terrifying theory, the allowed event theory. Did Lincoln know he was going to die? Did he let it happen? Some historians argue that Lincoln was obsessed with dreams. He famously dreamt of his own death days before it happened. What if the Shadow Post wasn't there to save him? What if they were there to ensure the event happened exactly as it was supposed to? Think about it. Stand until April 14th. Not protect the president, not stop the assassin. Stand. Wait. Hold the line until the date hits. Why? Maybe because Lincoln believed his death was necessary to seal the Union. Or maybe, and here's the wildest theory, Donovan wasn't protecting Lincoln from Booth. He was protecting the timeline. If Donovan was a watcher, maybe his job was to make sure history didn't deviate. If Lincoln had lived, maybe the Reconstruction would have failed. Maybe a second Civil War would have started. Maybe Donovan had to let the president die to save the country. But here's the catch. If Donovan was in D.C. on the night of the 14th, where was he? Why isn't he in the police reports? Kramer began pacing the room, his mind racing. "We need to check the John Doe files from April 15th, he said. He pulled up the archives of the Washington Metropolitan Police. He searched for bodies found within a 1-mile radius of Ford's Theater on the morning after the shooting. He found one. Case number 892, an unidentified male found in an alleyway 3 blocks from the theater. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the occipital lobe. No ID, no money, no weapons. Just a man in a farmer's set of clothes. It's not that simple, though. The coroner's report from 1865 noted one specific detail. Subject has unusual scarring on the left cheek and calloused hands consistent with chemical burns." Claire zoomed in on the photo again. High definition. There on William Donovan's left cheek was that faint white line, and on his hands, which were resting on his belt, the tips of his fingers looked discolored, red, raw, chemical burns. The realization hit them like a freight train. William Donovan was the John Doe. He had been eliminated hours after the assassination, but the chemical burns, that connected back to the photo itself. Remember the impossible chemistry, the organic dyes, the alchemy? The theory is that Donovan wasn't just the bodyguard, he was the chemist. He was the one who developed the Janus device, or the Kronos emulsion. He created the photo to preserve the truth, and the chemicals burned his hands in the process. The crazy part is, this implies he was taken out because he had the photo. He was carrying the evidence of the shadow post. He was likely on his way to deliver it or destroy it when someone caught up with him. So who killed him? It wasn't Booth. He was on the run. It had to be someone else, someone who knew about the shadow post, someone who wanted to erase the watchers. This leads to the idea of a civil war within the Civil War, a war between the shadow post and something else. The Golden Circle. The Knights of the Golden Circle were a real pro-slavery secret society. Did they hunt Donovan down? But if Donovan was murdered and stripped of his identity, how did the photo survive? How did it get into a trunk in upstate New York? That brings us back to the trunk, and the letter tucked inside the album lining. Claire had been so focused on the photo she had almost ignored the envelope. It was made of heavy parchment sealed with red wax that had turned black with age. It was signed by the only man who could tell the truth from beyond the grave. The shadow post. The room was so quiet you could hear the dust settling. Kramer held the envelope like it was a bomb. He didn't use his fingers. He used a bone folder, a smooth tool meant for delicate archives, to gently pry the paper open. The sound was sharp, like dry leaves cracking under a boot in winter. There was no stamp, no return address. There were no official seals of the White House or the War Department. There was just the name William scrawled on the front. The handwriting looked exhausted. It looked like the hand of a man who hadn't slept in 4 years. Kramer unfolded the letter. The paper was brittle, yellowed by a century and a half of hiding. The ink, once black, had faded into a ghostly brown that seemed to melt right into the fibers. Claire leaned in, her breath hitching in her throat. "My dearest William," Kramer read aloud. His voice trembled just a little. "If nothing else came out of this war, it tells us that the truth is seldom of great interest to those who need it the most. You were chosen not to draw your sword, but to stand visible among those who do." Kramer paused. He looked at Claire. This wasn't a military order. This was a confession. He continued reading, the words shifting from personal to something much darker, something prophetic. "Whatever we do with peace will challenge us far more than anything we did during the war. The shadows are lengthening. I fear the work is not done, but my part in it may be. Thus, stand where they don't expect you. Watch who you need to, and if history gives you a miss, allow it to. I won't." The signature at the bottom was a single 2-letter scrawl. "Al," Claire whispered. "Al?" "Abraham Lincoln," Kramer said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. It was the nickname used only by his closest inner circle. His wife, maybe his secretaries. Nobody else called the president Al. But here's the catch. This letter changes everything we think we know about Lincoln's mindset in those final bloody days of 1865. History books tell us Lincoln was looking forward to peace. They tell us he was relieved the war was ending. But this letter paints a picture of a man who was terrified. He wasn't just tired, he was preparing for the end. He wrote, "The shadows are lengthening." Lincoln knew. He knew the Golden Circle, that secret society of wealthy sympathizers and spies, was closing in on him. He knew the hunters were at the gate. He knew his time was up. So, what does a brilliant tactician do when he knows he is about to be taken off the board? He creates an insurance policy. He creates a time capsule. Kramer looked back at the color photograph on the table. The impossible photo. What most people don't realize is why the photo had to be in color. Think about it. In 1865, photography was black and white. It was gray. It was distant. Taking a photo in color wasn't just difficult, it was basically witchcraft. It required dangerous chemicals, precise mixtures of potato starch and light-sensitive dyes that didn't technically exist yet. It was an experimental, dangerous, alchemical process that burned the hands of the maker. Why go through that trouble? Why risk the health of the photographer? Why not just take a normal black and white tintype and be done with it? Because black and white feels like history. It feels safe. It feels dead. Lincoln didn't want a history lesson. He wanted a legacy image. He wanted a photo that looked real. He wanted the future, us, right here, right now, to look at it and see flesh and blood, not just gray ghosts. He wanted us to see the deep blue of the Union coats. He wanted us to see the flushed red cheeks of the soldiers. He wanted us to see the blood that had been spilled. He wanted it to be undeniable. He commissioned a prototype, a scientific moonshot. He had his shadow post, his secret intelligence unit, capture one moment of absolute truth before the end came, and he put William Donovan in the frame on purpose. "Stand where they don't expect you," the letter said. He made Donovan stand next to General Grant. He made sure the camera captured the man who wasn't supposed to be there. It was Lincoln's way of proving that the shadow post existed. If history gives you a miss, allow it to. Lincoln was telling Donovan that he would be erased, that he wouldn't get a medal, that he wouldn't get a parade. He would be deleted from the books to protect the mission. Lincoln was giving him an order: become a ghost. But Lincoln wanted him to have this one piece of proof, this one anchor in reality to prove he wasn't crazy. But the letter didn't stop there. It explained why Donovan's family had hidden it for so long. It explained the fear. The letter ended with a warning that sent a chill down Kramer's spine. Keep this hidden until the anger fades. The truth is heavy. Burn the chair, but keep the image. Burn the chair? Claire asked, frowning. She looked at the photo again. Her eyes drifted to the right side of the image, to the empty wooden chair beside Lincoln. The crazy part is, this is where the theories go off the rails. Why would Lincoln, a man who chose every word carefully, waste ink telling someone to burn a piece of furniture? Unless the chair wasn't just a chair. You see, historians have always argued about who was in the room when the war ended. But what if the camera captured something it wasn't supposed to? The wild theory? The chair wasn't empty when the photo was taken. Some researchers believe the chair was occupied by a Confederate general, maybe a high-ranking defector, or perhaps Robert E. Lee himself, surrendering in secret days before the official event at Appomattox. If a photo existed of Lincoln and Lee sitting together, discussing peace before the surrender, it would have destroyed Lincoln's political standing in the North. It would have looked like treason. So they used the early Photoshop of the day. They physically scraped the emulsion, or they burned the chair in reality to hide the evidence of the meeting. But there is a darker theory, a much wilder one. Listen to this. In the 1860s, there were rumors of a device called the Janus device. It was whispered about in the same circles that dabbled in spiritualism and early electricity. It was said to be a machine, a piece of technology that could capture the voice of the dead or see across great distances. Lincoln was known to be interested in new technology. He was the only president to hold a patent. He loved gadgets. What if the chair contained a piece of technology, a prototype weapon, a secure communications device, or something even stranger? The letter says, "Burn the chair." Maybe the chair was a code word. Maybe it wasn't furniture at all. Maybe the chair was the name of a dossier, a list of names, a list of the Golden Circle traitors within his own government. If that's true, then Donovan didn't just hide a photo. He destroyed the evidence of the biggest conspiracy in American history. Or perhaps, the camera captured something supernatural. We know Lincoln had dreams of his own death. We know his wife held seances in the White House. The chemical process used for this color photo was strange. It used silver and mercury. In alchemy, these are the elements used to bridge the gap between worlds. Did the camera capture a spirit? A shadow standing next to the president? Was William Donovan a time traveler, a psychic, or just a brave man in a secret war? What would you do if you found proof that the past isn't what we were told? Would you release the photo, or would you keep the secret? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want more mysteries that history tried to burn, smash that like button and subscribe. You won't believe what we found in the Titanic archives for the next video.